Soros' biography, but suffice it to say he is a multi-billionaire who has invested vast sums of his fortune into very many projects around the world seeking to influence political events. Now, that much is certain and without dispute, but the point in question is really to what extent does he actively participate in the construction of the New World Order as we have come to know it in this podcast. Well, let's take a look at some of his ideas specifically and from his own mouth. So, for example, when examining whether someone really is an advocate for the New World Order in the gang sense, well, let's take a look. So does George Soros, for example, define this New World Order as a one-world financial system which will necessarily see the erosion of national sovereignty?
What sort of a financial deal should Obama be seeking to strike when he travels to China next month?
No, I think this would be the time, because you really need to bring China into the creation of a new world order, financial world order. They are kind of reluctant members of the IMF. They play along, but they don't make much of a contribution because it's not their institution. Their share is not commensurate. Their voting rights are not commensurate to their weight. So I think you need a new world order that China has to be part of the process of creating it, and they have to buy in. They have to own it the same way as, let's say, the United States owns the Washington Consensus, the current order. And I think this would be a more stable one where you would have a coordinated policies. I think the makings of it are already there, because the G20, in agreeing to peer reviews, effectively is moving in that direction.
Okay, New World Financial Order, institution of one world system. Yes, okay, check. Well, how about the oft-spouted idea that the New World Order consists of taking advantage of crises and seeing them as opportunities, crisitunities, if one will? Does Soros adhere to that particular New World Order idea? Well, let's turn to the Mail Online from March 25th, 2009, by way of Infowars.com. Soros, I'm having a very good crisis. Quote, a hedge fund manager who predicted the global credit crunch has said the financial crisis has been stimulating and the culmination of his life's work. George Soros, who predicted the global financial crisis twice before, was one of the few people to anticipate and prepare for the current economic collapse. Mr. Soros said his prediction meant he was better able to brace his quantum investment fund against the global storm. But other investors failed to take notice of his prediction, and his decision to come out of retirement in 2007 to manage the fund made him $2.9 billion. And while the financial crisis continued to deepen across the globe, the 78-year-old still managed to make $1.1 billion last year. It is, in a way, the culminating point of my life's work, he told national newspaper The Australian. End quote. Now, I quote from the Infowars.com preserved version of that article, because if you go to the Mail Online, you will find that article is no longer online. Why is that? Well, an update came on 8th of June 2009, which reads, quote, an article published on 25th of March 2009 suggested that George Soros had said that he was having a very good crisis in respect of the recession. Mr. Soros has asked us to make clear that, in fact, he made no such comment. End quote. Well, there you go, straight from the horse's mouth. It was just some vicious rumor made up by some Mail Online reporter. And although you can go and watch YouTube interviews made by various news organizations that even quote that quote back to him in the interview, which he acknowledges and does not dispute at that time, but apparently it was completely made up. All right, well, fair enough. Can we on our own find any clips where he does see the crisis of the meltdown in the world financial system as an opportunity to bring in a new financial order?
Some have said the following, the Chinese were worried about an overheated economy,
right,
and it took an American recession to do it.
Right. That's correct. That's
Okay.
right.
So we have this global economic order.
Right.
Where does that put us? And what is the new reality for America as an economic power?
It is impairing that power.
Eroding it?
Eroding it. I wrote another book, The Bubble of American Supremacy,
Right.
where I used this financial analysis of analogy of bubbles to President Bush's pursuit of American supremacy.
Right.
And I said it's going to bust. And it has actually done tremendous damage to America's political and military power and influence in the world. So that we have suffered a big setback. Now we have a sort of a bit of the equivalent of that happening in the financial sphere. That is really what is happening. So the unquestioned dominance of the dollar is now questioned. And this creates a period of turmoil, just as politically you have turmoil because the world order, the political world order, comes back to your original question. The political world order was built on America as the dominant power. And then America failed in performing the role that was called upon, and that created a lot of uncertainty and turmoil in the world. And now the same thing is happening in the financial sphere.
Okay, Chrysotunity, check. And extra points for anyone out there who noticed that was Bilderberger Charlie Rose interviewing Bilderberger George Soros. And even more extra points for anyone who can guess what Charlie Rose's opening question for George Soros was in that April 2008 edition of The Charlie Rose Show.
A breakdown in the prevailing world order. Tell me how you see that.
Bilderberger Charlie Rose. Moving right along. Well, we've checked that, in fact, George Soros, the multi-billionaire investor and financier, has, in fact, been advocating a new world financial order of one world financial system, ruled by one world bureaucracy, headed, for example, by the IMF, having a peer review process where the IMF can determine the financial actions of any individual member state. Well then, how about the globalists' favorite tool of man-made global warming as the scare through which they can enact a fundamental transformation of the world economy and world political structures? Is George Soros in on that?
So let's think about those people down at Neely's Barbecue going home tonight, having heard you. What they've heard you say is the system is really dysfunctioning right now. It's out of control. Nobody's in charge. They've heard you express your own worry that in the next 3 months it could get much, much worse. And they've heard you say that you don't see much good news immediately on the horizon. So let's leave them something to think about as they go home. Let them go home and say, Mr. Soros said, here are 3 things we can do, simply. 1,
well, deal with the mortgage problem, reduce foreclosures, recapitalize the banks, and then work on a better world order where we work together to resolve problems that confront humanity, like global warming. And I think that dealing with global warming will require a lot of investment. You see, for the last 25 years, the world economy, the motor of the world economy that has been driving it, was consumption by the American consumer, who has been spending more than he's been saving, all right? Than he's been producing. So that motor is now switched off. It's finished. It's run out of, can't continue. You need a new motor. And we have a big problem, global warming. It requires big investment. And that could be the motor of the world economy in the years to come.
Putting more money in, building infrastructure, converting to green technology?
Instead of consuming, building electricity grid, saving on energy, or rewiring the houses, adjusting your lifestyle, where energy is got to cost more until you introduce those new things. So it will be painful, but at least we will survive and not cook.
You're talking about this being the end of an era and needing to create a whole new paradigm for the economic model of the country, of the world, right?
Yes.
Okay, New World Order of punishing austerity, where energy is exorbitantly expensive so that everyone has to be forced into rationing and there's an eventual cool-off of the population. Yes, check. And extra points go there not only to the people who pointed out that that was Bilderberg Bill Moyers interviewing Bilderberg George Soros, but that Bill Moyers is in fact a trustee of George Soros's Open Society Institute's board of directors. Now, that might seem like an offhand criticism of the, shall we say, cozy relationship between people like Moyers and Soros, or Soros and Rose, but in fact it actually goes quite to the heart of the matter in a number of ways, not only insofar as the fact that my favorite catchphrase of corporate-controlled media does, in fact, completely fail in the sense that it fails to deliver any understanding of the fact that the foundation-funded media, such as PBS or MoveOn.org or Current.com or any of those types of media platforms, alternate, are also, of course, very much corrupt and not to be trusted. But also, it shows that there is a left-right-wing split within the New World Order itself that represents not a fundamental difference in ultimate ideology. Of course, both groups are vying for the same thing, but they are vying for different ways and different routes to get there. And to a certain extent, it's part of the dialectical process, which we've looked at in the Problem, Reaction, Solution episode of this podcast, which is designed to eventually bring us to the pre-decided spot of totalitarian world government. You can either take the left way to get there or the right way to get there, but it's the same thing. Now, Soros would be perhaps the left-wing billionaire financier, puppet master, and string puller, whereas Warren Buffett would be the right-wing version of that, and people might remember where Warren Buffett was on 9/11. But ultimately, although they have competing ideas on such things as advocating the legalization of marijuana, or the war on terror and the way in which that should be waged, they will, of course, perfectly agree on such things as 9/11 and how Al-Qaeda pulled it off single-handedly. So, ultimately, it's going to lead us to the same direction. But we've taken a look at the official biography of George Soros, and that begs the question, well, if that's the clean, safe, sanitized version of his history, what is it that we're not finding out about George Soros's history?